My daughter, McKenzie Anderson, suffered 2 years of domestic violence before her life was tragically taken. Her murder happened in slow motion through many failures of the judicial and social system, and we're still yet to reach trial. My question to the panel is, when is there going to be an inquest into the actions of judges and the judicial system for domestic violence offenders?
Mark Speakman.
Well, there are often inquests into individual cases. The state government's spending $18 million into inquest the recent alleged murder. Criminal justice, the criminal justice system is an important part of the domestic violence response, but it's probably not the major part. But I think we can do a lot more to protect victims of domestic violence, and that's why we're suggesting as an opposition that we roll out electronic monitoring for serious domestic violence charges. We've done that for parolees and those on intensive corrections orders who've been convicted, and the evidence we got last year was that led to a 33% reduction in DV offending. It's not foolproof. You know where the offender or the accused is. You don't necessarily know what they're doing. It doesn't stop internet abuse. It doesn't stop telephone abuse. It doesn't stop tracking. It doesn't stop financial abuse. But it is a way to protect against physical harm and ultimately the worst sort of physical harm. So the justice system needs to be reviewed. That needs to be on the table. Basically,
so what do you think should be on the table, the question in relation to the way the judiciary deals with these issues?
Well, I think that's why we need a Royal Commission. We need a Royal Commission, not to put things on halt, not to stop, because there are some things we know we can do straight away. There's a lot of evidence. We just can't have a pause for 2 or 3 years. But I think we need that independent oversight.
And you think it should be just for New South Wales, or should there be a national one?
With respect to Murray, I'm disappointed there isn't going to be a federal Royal Commission apparently, but I think that would be ideal. But if it's not going to be done federally, we'd like to see one in New South Wales.
Why do you think there needs to be a federal one? Because the government argues that they have the solutions and they just want to get on with it. Why do you disagree with that?
Well, I don't think anyone can be absolutely sure they've got the solutions. There's an evidence base still developing on men's behaviour change programs, for example. It's still a bit of trial and error there. We don't know necessarily what works and what doesn't. I think a Royal Commission would be good to have that independent oversight, not to stop things, but have that independent oversight, and also to have the gravitas for action. We saw with the Child Abuse Royal Commission, that led to enormous action. I'm hoping with the Veteran Suicide Royal Commission, that's going to lead to enormous change. So I think the Royal Commission has that potential to have that gravitas to force action.
Tabitha, I just want to go back to you because your story is just shocking and heartbreaking. I wonder how the last couple of weeks have landed on you, watching this movement.
Yeah, it's been horrible. And to watch the recent murder in Forbes of Molly, her case was almost identical to my daughter's, and obviously I can't talk much about mine because it's still an active case. But I met with Mark 2 years ago and he was condescending and dismissive of me in the meeting when I did raise that there were major failures in the judicial system, and one of his answers, without giving details, was, how violent was it? You know, so your words don't mean a lot to me, and whilst I do agree that prevention is a huge thing that we need to do, and this is a multi-layer onion approach that we need, there are many judges letting violent offenders out without intervention. I 100% agree with your comment. We need some kind of counselling in there. We need rehabilitation. I don't want to throw men out with the bathwater. We have failed them at some point, and that's how they've got there. We have to have compassion at the same time. I'm not going to become angry and bitter to all men, but what we do need to do is that we can't slap them on the wrist and say, now your life's at risk because I'm not going to actually follow through with some actions on this. And that's what upsets me greatly with that. I think that this is such a multi-layered issue and we need a lot of different approaches all at once. But the judicial system plays a huge role in it and we have to do better.
OK, Mark, obviously this was not a positive interaction for Tabitha. Do you remember it?
I do. I remember Tabitha coming to my office. If I was condescending, I apologise. I'm not trauma-informed. I do my best, but obviously, you know, in many cases it's not good enough.
Tabitha?
I think, you know, obviously you've led a very privileged male life and you did the best you could in that situation, but I think you need to get much more informed.
But do you think all politicians do? As you're watching the nation and this unfold, what are your reflections?
Yeah, I think there is a lot of privilege involved in a lot of politicians' lives, and you know, and I'm sure I walked with that privilege before I had to walk into this disaster as well. Unfortunately, I'm living this life and I'm seeing the failures firsthand. And unfortunately, through my experiences, I've met lots of other families in the same situations as me, and we unfortunately tell very similar stories. And that's the really sad thing, is that Molly's story isn't a new story. It's the same story as Mackenzie's 2 years ago, and nothing changed. And Mackenzie's story isn't a new story. It's the same story as 2 years before that, and 2 years before that, and 2 years before that. We're not making change, and that's what's really sad, because I don't want to see other families experience the trauma that I have, and my friends and my family. And unfortunately, I see the media, and the last 2 weeks have been very triggering for me, because I know exactly how those families feel. I know their life just became ruined in a way they never could have imagined. And unfortunately, I know I might turn on the television tomorrow and the same thing, and the same thing, and the same thing.
Tabitha, can I say I'm really sorry to hear your story, and for anybody that has had to experience that. But you're so right, and one of the things that I think is so important for everybody to hear, because I don't think the media reflects this adequately. This whole of system and the compassion element, we've seen that numerous times in recent events, but it's always downplayed in the media, and it ends up becoming heavily politicised, which is just incredibly triggering for everybody who's experienced something like that. And I know I do some work as an ambassador for the Chapel Foundation, which has to do with homeless youth. And most of the homeless youth, there's tens of thousands on the street because of domestic violence at home. And so there's all of these interjections that have to work together so that we never, ever get to that point. And of course, the judicial system sits at the top of that. But that's the end of the road, isn't it?
Yeah.
And there's all of these other steps in the way.
Yeah, plays a big role in this. Obviously, I've done a lot of media talking, and a lot of the times when I talk about compassion and prevention and how we can intervene, it doesn't make it to the screens. It doesn't make it to paper. They want the trauma porn from me. They want to see me crying. They want to display me on something. They want to put me up like that, but they don't want to have the real discussions. And that's really annoying, because you're there going, I actually think there's space to have compassion, and there's space to have better conversations, because just saying they did everything wrong and they have to take responsibility won't fix the problem.
And that's
a
the
really
only way
powerful
things
point.
heal.
Powerful.
And trauma porn is a really good way of describing it, and I think the media has been. We know that we're having our own reckoning about the way that we deal with these issues. The fundamental question, though, about a review into the way judges deal with these issues. Does all of that have to be on the table, and can that only be through a royal commission?
I absolutely think it has to be on the table, and thank you, Tabitha, for sharing your story. I can't imagine what you and your family have gone through since that terrible event. And I've certainly met with victim survivor organisations, women legal services, who always raise the need for more training of judges, registrars, police, politicians. We need more as well. My wife has worked in this space in a policy sense, so I guess I've benefited a little bit from that, but I'm by no means an expert. But I guess it goes to that broader point that you're making, that this is going to need such a variety of different actions. It does need more resourcing. I would argue that we are providing a lot of resourcing, but it needs resourcing. It needs legislative change. It needs training. It needs housing, crisis accommodation. It needs a range of responses. And I guess the point is we've got to seize this moment and actually make this a national turning point. I feel like, we've been in this place before. I'm sure all the women in the audience feel it much more deeply than I do. We cannot allow this to continue without seizing the moment and driving some change.
So how do we make it a national turning point?
Yeah, I think, Tabitha, I just can't imagine. So, and you're right, it has happened time and time and time again. And women, we get to a certain age and we're like, really? Really? What used to be behind the front door now is out of the front door, wasn't ever reported in the media, and it is everywhere. And I think it needs to stay there until we actually get some tangible actions. And it is about the Jess Hill piece about short-term, medium-term and long-term strategies, not pouring all the money into prevention. How am I getting help tonight or this week or next week?
And can we stop the motherhood statements?
I hate the word motherhood statement because it assumes something's wrong with mothers. Yeah,
you're right.
But the blanket
you're right, we should ban that. But yes,
absolutely.
We need to change in 50 years.
Well, of course it's cultural, and that's going to take decades. So I hope I've raised my sons to not do this, and I hope we're all raising our sons and our daughters to be good men and women and not to throw masculinity out, because it is a powerful force for good in this world. And I would hate my sons to think that's a bad thing, but it has to be exercised appropriately and responsibly.
Yep.
Instead of maybe spending another $300 million on a Royal Commission that will just go to lawyers, can I suggest a few other ways we could spend it? Yeah? And we get that money immediately out because we're seeing just this increase in demand on all the frontline services that are there, on refuges. I know we are investing in them, but we've got to clear a lot of the red tape because the sector is crying out. They're crying out and they are stretched to capacity. And the stories and the women who are coming into those services, the stories they tell, are stories no one should ever have to tell.
No.
And so, you know, let's make sure we get where it's needed first.
Can I just comment on the regional piece? Because I know we're in Sydney, but if you are out in the regions, who's doing the bail? Who's the registrar on the weekend? Where is the service? It's 200 kilometres away. There's a whole raft of next layer of intractability and inaccessibility too, I think.